Bridget McKenzie, welcome to the program.
Great to be with you, David.
So do you agree with Barnaby Joyce, or do you think Lidia Thorpe was right to speak up about David Van?
I don't agree with Barnaby Joyce on this matter. Parliamentary privilege is a powerful and very careful part of our democracy, and senators across the ages have used it in very powerful ways to raise claims and matters of public interest from time to time. Senator Thorpe was absolutely within her right to use parliamentary privilege to raise those issues as she did. The fact that when we do discuss sexual assault in the way that we have in the recent past, it can be incredibly traumatic for those people who have been through those types of incidents, and whether it's our staff, our colleagues, or indeed the broader community. This time, just like the last time, there have been quite visceral responses, which I believe hers was.
So were you surprised to hear allegations of this sort made against Senator Van?
I wasn't aware of any specific allegations at all, but as always in this place, and the media would be well aware of this, there are rumours from time to time about certain individuals. So I was aware of rumours,
right,
but I was not
David
aware
Van.
of any, no, and I wasn't aware of the Amanda Stoker allegations either.
But you were aware of rumours about David Van?
Well, David, there's rumours about various individuals. I've been here for 14 years. I hear a lot of rumours, and if I acted on every single one of them, that would, you know, not result in the best outcome. I probably am a person that, if I have first-hand information, I take action, and I don't listen to gossip or rumours.
Were you aware his office had been moved a couple of years ago?
No, I was not.
As you were National Senate leader at the time, you still are.
Yep.
You weren't told about moving a coalition senator, a Liberal senator's office?
No, and as I understand it, that was a matter between the President at the time, Scott Ryan, the leader of the Liberal Party, and the leader of the Greens, who took that matter seriously, made the appropriate actions.
I wonder if you can just explain to viewers how it is that, you know, in the nature of this building, in this workplace, you have various complainants about a senator, and we were discussing this earlier. There's appears no one really putting two and two together and thinking maybe there's something more to look at here.
Well, I think it also goes to some of the comments the three fantastically strong female journalists you now have on the couch, which, you know, 14 years ago, insiders wouldn't have had three female journalists, and nor would Parliament have three shadow and ministers in three economic portfolios that are women, you know, finance, resources and infrastructure. So a lot has changed over time, and I think we have to recognise that. I know setting up PWSS, which Senator Thorpe's allegations were referred to, is important. That didn't exist 5 years ago. So when you talk about joining the dots, as you know, political parties are quite separate entities. Both the chambers operate as separate entities with their own presiding officers and own processes. And that's why I think setting up the PWSS was so important. So there was a one-stop shop, if you like, for colleagues, for staff within Parliament House, for MPs to be able to go to for confidential you know, counselling and advice on how to handle these, that will also give that procedural fairness that you were talking about earlier as well.
Yeah, but will you be asking any questions of the Liberals as to who knew what and when about Senator Van?
Well, I think Peter Dutton's made absolutely the right call in throwing him out of
but this is
the
2
Liberal
years
Party.
on. This is 2 years on. I mean, do you see any need to explore who knew what and when back then?
Well, David, as soon as Senator Thorpe made those allegations on the floor of Parliament, it was referred to the President, which was absolutely the right thing to do. And then following a second allegation being raised, the leader of the Liberal Party threw this senator out of the party. Now, I think there was a lot of cheers silently across parliamentary offices with such decisive action being taken by a leader. We know that both the Labor Party, One Nation, the Greens, the Liberal Party, all political parties have faced these type of internal challenges over the recent past. And for a leader to be so decisive, I think, was a testament to his strength of feeling around these matters.
Now, you have been asking a lot of questions over the past week of Labor about who knew what and when in relation to the Brittany Higgins rape allegation. What did all of those questions during the week achieve?
Well, I think they were very legitimate questions. When it became apparent that Senator Gallagher knew prior to these allegations being made public through the airing of the project, that she did know that they were coming. And so we asked very, I think, legitimate questions about who knew what when, what they did with that information. I think questions still remain about the compensation payout. It was incredibly quick with respect to the usual timeframes. The assessment of this claim didn't actually specifically excluded evidence from key stakeholders such as Senators Cash and Reynolds. And indeed, it was a significant sum of taxpayers' money. So I think there are still legitimate questions to ask about that process. And I think at the end of the week, those allegations of Senator Gallagher about misleading Parliament, I think, were prosecuted fully in the Senate, as they should be.
Are you suggesting, though, that Labor should have ignored what Brittany Higgins was alleging at the time about how she'd been treated in the building? Was it fair enough for them to pursue this?
I think every opposition should ask legitimate questions of governments in both Senate and House question time. That is actually the process of democracy. And Labor didn't take a backward step at that time. And if you recall the ferocity of both, not just the language used, but the tone, specifically targeting certain ministers and former ministers at the time who were also female. I think, we were very careful this week with our tone to make sure that we were sticking to the factual pieces that we wanted to ascertain. And I think that was the right way to go, but still, as I mentioned in my opening comments, that still raises issues for individuals. I mean, like Senator Gallagher, as a senior female on my side of politics, I have regularly, not just community members, but staff members, colleagues coming to me, raising issues of sexual harassment and others. And my job as a senior woman in this place, if we want to see that cultural change, is to actually make sure they're aware of their options, make sure that they know they're going to be supported no matter what they choose, but to keep it confidential, which I do, to make sure that they have agency about what has occurred to them. And I think that is part of that tension. I really would hate to see a situation arise where we are mandatorily having to report these things, because it takes that agency away. And if I think back over my career, I don't think silence in these matters is a good thing. And what we have been able to see over the past few years, as we get more women into senior leadership, as we have exposure around these topics at a public level, we are putting in institutional frameworks to make change, and we are seeing culture change because we're not staying silent.
Can I just pick up what you just said there? Women come to you as a senator, a woman in leadership, and they raise complaints with you about their treatment. You have just said you absolutely respect the confidentiality that's required. So when Katy Gallagher says, as she's been saying all week, that she is not going to breach the confidentiality of Brittany Higgins and David Shiraz at that moment, do you respect that?
Well, at the time in the chamber, I was agreeing with Minister Gallagher, and I wouldn't be the only senior woman in leadership who has both the responsibility to hear that we are the people that people trust to come to us, and that we have an absolute obligation to keep that confidential, because it is every single woman's right to determine how she takes forward what's happened to her.
So why are you asking all these questions of Katy Gallagher? Sorry to interrupt.
She might choose to stay silent.
Yeah.
She might choose to take it to the police. She might choose, as Amanda Stoker did, to front up and resolve the situation to her satisfaction with the person who did the actions to her. And I think, so there's a whole kind of spectrum of options.
But isn't there a contradiction here? You're asking Katy Gallagher to divulge what she did with this information. She's saying she needs to respect their confidentiality.
No, that's why, David, we weren't asking about what the confidentiality that wasn't the questioning. The questioning was, once she knew what she knew, that's in that.
Okay.
What did she do with that? Was that information then used and known by others? Because if you recall back to the prosecution of the then government around these matters, there was sort of this incredulousness that the Prime Minister didn't know that Linda Reynolds had kept those conversations with Brittany Higgins confidential. There was a sort of this incredulousness that hadn't occurred. No one believed Senator Reynolds in that moment. So I do think there needs to be consistency.
I want to move on to some of your portfolio matters. In infrastructure in particular, you've been critical of the government for having a quick review of all the projects in the infrastructure pipeline. We're talking about hundreds of projects. Government says some of them are underfunded, even unfunded completely. What's wrong with having a good look at all of these projects to work out whether they're value for money and are going to deliver some productivity benefit?
Yeah, well, David, the government came to power and conducted an audit of the infrastructure area prior to the October budget, and as a result, slashed over $9.6 billion of infrastructure projects. They then, got rolled in National Cabinet about what the profiling of the $120 billion infrastructure pipeline was going to look like with state governments, with different premiers having different perspectives on which projects should be cancelled and which shouldn't. And so they announced a quick snap review. Well, there is nothing quick or snap or impartial about this review. The Minister herself has been overruled by the Prime Minister about which projects are included and which aren't. And indeed, local governments across the country were stunned when they found out, following Senate estimates, that it just wasn't the 400 infrastructure projects that were up for review, but key programs such as Roads to Recovery, Bridges and Renewal programs that are part of their ongoing budget cycle. I mean, these are programs that were piloted under Hawke and implemented by Howard, and local governments have relied on for decades in some cases to help them maintain and improve their road network. So the government, this is now sort of really thrown into question the independence of the review headed by Mike Murdoch, and really is the government putting on hold. There's going to be significant impacts to the construction industry as they've basically put the whole pipeline on the go slow.
But do you accept there are some things that you guys funded, the grants programs and other infrastructure spending, that the Commonwealth really shouldn't be involved in? Roundabouts, a mini golf course. Is this really the role of the Commonwealth government?
Well, I think if you'll go through the Labor government's commitments both previously and into the future, federal government overreach into state areas is sadly, as a federalist, something that we now have to live with.
So you're both guilty of it.
If we want to get all quite, theoretical and specific about it, we shouldn't be involved in education or health funding either if we're going to be following the constitutional guidelines. So, I think much concern. There's already job losses on halting these major projects because construction companies have geared up for it. They've hired people, they've hired kit and bought kit to actually have this sequenced series of works, and that's all been put on hold for up to 6 months, which is unacceptable.
Final one, the electric vehicles, the government's consulting on a fuel efficiency standard, introducing a fuel efficiency standard in Australia. Plenty of other countries have them, we don't. What's your view in principle on having a fuel efficiency standard in Australia?
Yeah, well, David, we and the Coalition are absolutely committed to a low emissions transport sector. That includes a whole raft of strategies. And I was at the Brisbane Truck Show a couple of weeks ago, and we've got hydrogen heavy haulers, and we've got small electric trucks that Australia Post, for instance, is going to use to deliver parcels around our suburbs. What we need to do is approach this from a principled level at this stage. We're waiting for those submissions.
And what is your position on a fuel efficiency standard?
Yeah, well, it needs to be something that's affordable for Australians. It needs to make sure that certain Australians aren't discriminated against over others, people in rural and regional Australia, for instance, people on low incomes. And it needs to make sure that Australians still have the choice of vehicles that we enjoy today. I mean, under our government, EV purchases were going through the roof. That trend is continuing. But people on low incomes are not in that, you know,
so you are willing to negotiate with the government.
Regions.
You are willing to negotiate with the government on the structure of it, but in principle you support the idea of some sort of standard.
Well, in principle, I support the outcome, which is a low emissions transport sector going forward to 2050.
Through a fuel efficiency standard.
Well, we're still in the middle of having a look at what the submissions say and what the recommendations say. So I'm saying I'm approaching this with an open mind, but I have some guardrails around affordability, choice, and who's going to be disadvantaged or not.
All right, Bridget McKenzie, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, mate.